community, city staff, and city council for joining us for the fall budget monitoring process for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Tonight, council's here to listen to the community. We'll be hearing comments on the fall budget monitoring process, or the fall BMP. The fall BMP is one of 3 budget monitoring processes during the fiscal year. The fall BMP is focused on summarizing prior year budget and performance activity, as well as providing an opportunity to adjust the current year budget. My name is Jen Gray O'Connor, and I will be your moderator. To ensure that everyone who signed up is able to speak, we'll be brief in our opening remarks, but know that public comment will begin in about 30 minutes. First, I want to give you an overview of our agenda for tonight. We will start our evening by reviewing the rules of conduct for this meeting, and then we'll hear from several speakers. First, we'll hear from City of Portland Budget Director Jessica Kennard to help provide some background and context for the budget process. This portion will take about 30 minutes. Next, the city economist Josh Harwood will provide an economic forecast. We will then hear from the Office of Equity and Human Rights Director, Dr. Markeisha Smith, followed by remarks from the Office of Government Relations Director, Elizabeth Edwards. We will then hear remarks from the mayor and the city council members. After that, we'll begin hearing community comments. Comment times were arranged ahead of time. However, there will be additional opportunity to make your voice heard. So some of these additional opportunities include submitting comments on the online form at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. Or you can also email comments to citybudgetoffice@portlandoregon.gov. You can also participate in an additional listening session on October 6th, and you can give testimony at the City Council hearing on the fall BMP on October 28th. Okay, but before we begin, we'll read our rules of conduct for this meeting. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during the City Council meetings so that everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in the meeting, participants applied to give comments online. So if you did not apply and you'd like to comment, submit your comment in writing at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. When commenting, please state your name for the record, but your address is not necessary. Declare if you are a lobbyist, or if you're representing an organization, please identify it. You will have 2 minutes to comment, and you'll be timed by staff. And then when your time is over, you'll be given a verbal warning and then muted to allow for as much participation as possible. Disruptive conduct will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption will result in ejection from the meeting. If this disruption continues, the community member will be muted and ejected. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders to feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. Just a quick note before we begin on electronic meetings. So under the Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding these meetings electronically. All members of City Council are attending remotely by internet connection or by telephone. The city provides several options for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGov PDX, or at www.portlandoregon.gov/video, as well as on channel 30. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the need to limit in-person contact and promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens our public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. So thank you sincerely for your patience, for your flexibility and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation. So as our task is to listen to community input, we're also going to provide information about the fall budget monitoring process, as well as future budget processes. So we'll start off with Budget Director Jessica Kennard giving you a Budget 101 and some background on the process.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening and thank you for being here. I just want to clarify quickly, the entire list of individual presentations will take 30 minutes. I love budget, but I know nobody really wants to hear me speak for that long, so I will try to be brief. But I did want to provide you, I'm here to provide you with a little bit of budgetary contextual information, just to be able to inform and empower your engagement tonight and in the future. So, Portlanders receive services from several different public entities, including counties, school districts, Metro, and TriMet. At the city, the services that we provide can be organized into the service areas that are described on this slide. Quickly, through our Bureau of Transportation, we manage the right-of-way and we provide certain transportation services. We provide public safety services, including police, fire, 911 call taking, and emergency management services. We provide a whole host of community development services, including permitting, our Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, our Office of Community and Civic Life, our Housing Bureau, and our Office for Community Technology. We also provide support for the Joint Office of Homeless Services through an intergovernmental agreement with the county. Our public utilities include our Bureau of Environmental Services and our Water Bureau. And we support and manage Portland's parks and some recreational facilities. And finally, we have a host of back office support functions that enable us to provide direct service to community members. So this chart shows how the total city budget is divided among these different service areas. The total budget for the city for this year is $5.6 billion, and this includes everything. It includes all different types of revenue sources, funding for our day-to-day operating expenditures, as well as funding for larger and multi-year capital projects, and some funding for things like reserves. So this is everything all together. You can see that our largest expenditure groups are within the service area of the public utilities as well as administration and support. And this is because both of those service areas have very large multi-year projects and plans that they have to save up money for to implement over time. So the vast majority of the city's budget, about 90%, which is the gray portion of this tree map, is comprised of resources that are received or collected for specific purposes, and they're legally restricted from being spent on anything but that specific type of service. So this is things like when you pay your water or your sewer bill, that funding when it comes to the city can only be spent to support the things like providing water and sewer services. So about 10% of the city's budget, which is that green portion, is general fund discretionary, which means there are only a few restrictions on what council can spend that money on. Council discussions tend to focus on the allocation of these discretionary resources as there's the most flexibility around how those dollars can be spent. So this chart shows how those discretionary resources are allocated in this year's adopted budget. This year, total discretionary resources around $570 million. The majority of general fund discretionary dollars are used to support public safety services, including police, fire, and 911 call taking. Additionally, you can see that the city spends a notable portion of discretionary resources on parks and recreation and community development services such as homeless services and planning services. So we at the city operate on a fiscal year calendar that runs from July 1st to June 30th. Our primary budget process is the development and adoption of this annual budget, which takes place each spring. Most operational and budgetary decisions, including the allocation of ongoing resources, are made during this annual budget process. However, our annual budget is a plan, and frequently there needs to be adjustments that are made throughout the course of the year to that plan. To accommodate the need to make these mid-year adjustments, we have supplemental budget processes, which are also times that we perform budget monitoring tasks. So we abbreviate these processes to be this BMP for budget monitoring process that we actually refer to as the bump. So when you hear fall bump, we're talking about this fall process that's in front of us right now. This process this fall it's typically comprised primarily of technical adjustments and true-ups, but bureaus may also request one-time general fund contingency resources for urgent and unforeseen needs. But this year, we're in a unique situation budgetarily due to the dramatic change in resources that occurred last spring. As a result, the council is considering some decisions this fall that are unique. So in April of last spring, just weeks before the mayor was to produce the mayor's proposed budget, we updated the general fund forecast to reflect an anticipated $75 million decline due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, the city took a number of measures to quickly reduce spending and balance the budget. This included eliminating forecasted revenues, drawing upon reserves and set-asides, and freezing non-essential spending. General fund bureaus were all directed to reduce their discretionary budgets by 5.6%, and most bureaus realized this level of reduction by freezing wages and materials and services spending. But for some bureaus, the citywide freezes on wages and materials and services were not sufficient to meet their reduction target. And in these cases, those bureaus were asked to develop cut packages for consideration as part of this fall bump process to help the city balance its budget. There were also a number of notable changes to the Portland Police Bureau's budget over the course of last spring's budget process. The mayor's proposed budget directed the PPB to take a 5.6 budget reduction, as was the case with all the general fund bureaus, and also eliminated resources for the body-worn camera program, among other reductions. The council approved budget reallocated $1.9 million from the PPB's budget to a policy set-aside account for sobering center services. And finally, during the adopted phase of the budget, the council eliminated $15 million from the PPB's budget and 84 sworn full-time equivalent positions. A summary document of these reductions, as well as where and how funds were reallocated, can be found on the CBO's website in our section on our fiscal year 2021 budget development. So the decisions in front of the council this fall during this fall bump process include the following list. As is typically the case, we have some technical adjustments. There is a consideration of some bureau cuts that they're bringing forward as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's an allocation there's the consideration of whether council would like to allocate policy set aside and contingency funds. There's continued policy discussion as has been prescribed in budget notes. And then we're thinking about, and we're always trying to prepare for the next budget process, which is going to be happening this spring in anticipation of the next annual budget, 21-22 budget. So we're in the middle of our supplemental budget process now with this event. Next, the City Budget Office will produce our analyses and reviews, which will be followed by a council work session on October 20th, and finally a council hearing on October 28th. For more information on the city's budget or to submit your budget comment online, please visit our website at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jen.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. Next, we are going to hear from the city economist, Josh Harwood.
Josh, are you muted?
Yep, I sure was. I'm not anymore though. So let me see if I can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So I'll be pretty brief. What is my screen doing? I'll be pretty brief. I think maybe I'll just talk. So the context for where we are right now in the city budget and as the revenue streams relate to the economy are a little bit disconnected. And so it's really hard to sort of describe or to sort of make a one-to-one comparison with the economy and our revenue streams. Our revenue streams are a little bit better than we thought, but again, that's relative to a very bad situation that we forecasted in April. So we're still not in a good situation as far as that goes. And then, and mostly that's because the folks that have been most impacted by COVID-19 and frankly, probably the fires as well, are the people that are, tend to be in leisure and hospitality, hotels, restaurants, those kinds of things. So they tend to be lower income folks to begin with. And so the higher income folks, higher wage folks tend to be better off right now. And they're not flying anywhere. They're not traveling. They're not doing any of those things that they would use their money for. And so the reality is that they're saving a lot of money, or they're spending it on things like home furnishings. Home Depot is doing great during this pandemic. And so it's more of a winners and losers situation than, say, the financial crisis of 2008, where everything sort of stopped. And I think we're a little bit better off as far as that goes. And in 2008, the city just saw we just saw our general fund flatten out. It didn't actually fall. So we've projected a decrease, and I think that's right. I think we're going to see a decrease, but it's going to look a little bit different and it's going to look different in different bureaus too, to be fair, in different funds, but it's going to look a little bit different than 2008. And so I think that's sort of where we're at right now. We're going to get a lot of more information in October, both with property taxes and with business license taxes. And so we'll have a more broader update at that point, but that's sort of where we're at right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Josh, for the update. Next, we'll have an equity message from the Office of Equity and Human Rights from Dr. Markeisha Smith.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay, does everything look good? All right, so just really quickly, my name is Markeisha Smith. I'm the director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, City of Portland here, and going to just really briefly kind of share a little bit about what has been happening since we have been impacted by the pandemic. There have been a series of different life and natural events that have certainly shifted the way in which we are approaching the work that we do. And while I say brief, right, the work of equity is not brief. It is a work that requires digging in. And so we are certainly never in any hurry to make sure that we are doing what it is that we need to do. But we do understand that there is a specific response, right, that needs to take place given the circumstances that we're facing right now. So a couple of really important city council resolutions that have passed over the last few months. And the first was specific to our COVID-19 efforts, but really what I would say is instrumental about this particular resolution is that it really granted some authority to our Office of Equity to work in partnerships with equity managers, other practitioners across the city, our city budget office, so great to be in partnership with Jessica, and other community partners to really think about how we center equity as we are developing and implementing our COVID-19 response measures. And I think that, that's evidenced in the way in which the CARES Act funding, that process was initiated. And we really, have seen a different way of doing business. And I think that this resolution, along with just a strong commitment from leadership across the city, has gotten us to where we are right now. And the other piece here is that we had an equity toolkit that accompanied this resolution. And really within that toolkit, we're asking folks to think about how they are prioritizing Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with disabilities, and other historically oppressed communities. And so that toolkit has been a wonderful instrument that folks have been able to use as they are having discussions and making decisions, very critical decisions about what happens with resources across the city. And then we had what was really, I remember, a very touching city council meeting with this particular resolution that passed on June 17th. And a couple of things happened, and I forgot to mention this in the slide that you see here, but we had our Juneteenth resolution passed on this day. And really that was significant because it was the first time that the city was recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday. And that I think resonated very strongly given all of the events that have been taking place across our country nationally with the murder of George Floyd and things here locally. And so just very touching, right? I'm sort of remembering that moment. But the other thing that I think is really important that also happened that day was the City Council adopted our new core values. And I think these core values really speak to the way in which we are approaching our budget processes. And I'm very happy that one of the first phrases there is around anti-racism, like and what that really means. And so anti-racism is not equity, right? Equity is a particular body of work that I think is a response to what we see happening across our city, across our nation as it relates to racism. But being anti-racist is a different way of being and operating. And so our city is really taking some measures to think about how we are being anti-racist. And can we call ourselves that, right, at this particular moment in time without really digging in and doing some of the work that makes that come to fruition? So really excited about the partnership in this particular resolution that happened with our Human Resources Office as well. And you'll see here just kind of re-emphasizing those core values for you, right? Anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility, all of which are very applicable to the conversation that we're having here this evening. And then just to kind of give an idea of the broad sort of key areas for funding and the ways in which we have been talking to folks, and I've been engaging with other bureau directors as decisions are being made. What we're really looking for is work that is sustainable, that is long-term, the kind of programs and services that don't just go away, right? Kind of, really have some longevity so that those supports are in place, can really do what they're intended to do. And so thinking about that, we are really encouraging folks and making it, almost a non-negotiable in a lot of ways that we are prioritizing Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with disabilities. And we've been talking a lot about the intersections of identity. So what does intersectionality mean in this conversation? The other place is really thinking about how we're replacing policy and practice that really perpetuates the barriers that we often talk about trying to remove. And in this particular instance, we've been having a lot of conversation around contracting and procurement. So what are some processes that sometimes hang us up, right? We are sometimes in our own way. And so how can we remove those kind of barriers to really have equity in our contracting and procurement processes? And then finally, how are we building capacity within bureaus to engage in practice? And so we have equity managers and equity practitioners that are scattered throughout bureaus across the city. Is that enough? Do we have enough capacity? My office is in place to help lead that. But even in all of that, right, the need is big, the need is vast. And so we're really thinking about, ways to expand the capacity for bureaus to be able to do this work. Call to action whenever I have an opportunity. I'm always thinking about what's that message, and I could probably just talk about this one slide for the rest of the evening, but we got to really be about opposing anti-Black racism. And so we talk about being an anti-racist organization, and a layer below that, right, or layer deeper, not below, but just deeper, is really thinking about how are we opposing anti-Black racism, and that's a real thing. It shows up in all of our processes, right? Budget not excluded. And so how can we really oppose anti-Black racism? Secondly, how are we challenging white supremacist policy and practice? Just flat out, right? What are the things that we're not going to tolerate? What are the things that are unacceptable? What are the things that we know are morally just not okay, right? And so how are we really thinking about ways in which to challenge that? And then finally, engaging your elected leaders. And this is a process, right, that is an example of that. Right, so that we have that feedback directly from the community to think about how we can do our business differently in partnership with everyone. If you want more information related to my office, I have the website down there, but these are some of the things you might find there, in addition to some lovely pictures of my wonderful team. But we have some things that are related to our procedures and our guidance. There are tools. We have a budget equity tool that we have developed in partnership with our CBO and just continue to expand and adapt and adjust that as we hear feedback around how to really make it better, to make it more useful, and to really have it be something that encourages bureau directors and leaders, managers to center equity. So just a little bit of everything there. So if you're curious about other things that we do, please stop by our website and reach out if you have questions or concerns. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Thank you for centering that discussion. We are next going to hear from the Office of Government Relations Director, Elizabeth Edwards.
Hello, let me see if I can get the right screen shared. That's the wrong one. Let's see. Apologies. Let me try one more time. Gosh, I'm having the same issue Josh had. You know what? Well, I know we're short on time. I will.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
you want to
Yes.
stop sharing? I think we can see your screen still.
All of my emails? Okay, let me try one more time.
You're good. You're good now.
Am I good now?
Yeah.
All right, well, I will just go through the content. Everyone got to see my email backlog, so that's a sense of how far I have to go. Good evening, my name is Elizabeth Edwards. I'm the Director of the Office of Government Relations and not the Bureau of Technology Services, so apologies for my struggles. My job here is to give some quick grounding on what's been happening at the federal and state governments budgetarily. I'm going to focus especially on the last 6 months, just because that's when we've really been in crisis around responding to the pandemic and a number of other rolling crises. So starting with the federal government, we had a very active couple of months back in March and April. You had the National Disaster Declaration, which triggered FEMA reimbursements. The federal government will reimburse eligible expenses at about 75%. There's been some discussion of increasing that share, but right now it stays around 75%. There were also big congressional actions around the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act and the CARES Act. I'll return to the CARES Act. That was a big one. It was $2 trillion, and it had specific response dollars for state and local governments, which are really, really important to this discussion. Then you had a lot of the actions sort of taper off. You saw some executive actions, memoranda, orders coming out in August. They weren't those sort of very big dollar ticket amounts that occurred earlier on in the crisis. So for the CARES Act, you had $114 million get directly allocated to the city of Portland. You heard Dr. Smith refer to some of the work that the city did in allocating those funds. The state of Oregon also received nearly $1.4 billion from the CARES Act. And I'll touch on some of the things that they, some highlights from what they expended those dollars on. Of note, they can't go toward lost revenue. It has to go toward crisis response, and they need to be expended by the end of the year. And so that impacts some of these conversations around budget. There's been a lot of conversations about, will we see another big package? Will we see another big sort of crisis response or recovery stimulus type package? At this point in time, it is extremely unlikely that anything would come together before the end of the year. We are fully in campaign season. And unfortunately, with the passing of Justice Ginsburg, there's just no kind of air left for Congress to take up a significant sort of multi-trillion-dollar package of the kind that we would otherwise want to see. Two other things on the congressional budget. The end of the fiscal year is September 30th, so we're coming up on that. Congress needs to pass what's called the Continuing Resolution in order to keep the federal government running. As of just an hour or two ago, the House actually passed the Continuing Resolution. It now goes over to the Senate. My understanding is that there is a deal to keep funding relatively stable, along with an additional $8 billion for nutrition assistance. So we'll continue to monitor that, and it will hopefully get done before the end of September, and that would push out the budget authorization to mid-December. The other thing for the federal government is that the federal government does not need to balance its budget. So you'll hear folks talk about the national debt. This is because the federal government doesn't need to balance its budget, whereas the state and local governments do. So transitioning to what's been going on for the state of Oregon budgetarily. Now, I have to say, our best revenue forecast information is from May. That was the first forecast since the pandemic started. And unfortunately, tomorrow is when we get the next revenue forecast. So we may have some slight updates that will be, that may change some of these numbers. So please, watch the news. Tomorrow, you should be seeing some coverage come out on that tomorrow. But we have substantial budget shortfalls, of $1 billion just for the end of this current fiscal year. And looking ahead, as of the May forecast, a $4.4 billion shortfall for the upcoming biennium, which is 2021-23 for the state. So, as I said, the state does need to balance its budget. So when the legislature met in special session for the second time, this was back in August, they focused on balancing the state budget. And they did that in order to fill that $1 billion gap through a mix of cuts, dipping into the Education Stability Fund reserves, as well as some one-time savings. Now, they're going to need to do some additional belt tightening going forward. We'll know a little bit more again tomorrow with the revenue forecast, as well as the governor's recommended budget, which will come out in December. That will give us a much better sense of the scale of the cuts going into the next biennium. I noted that the state received just shy of $1.4 billion in CARES funding. To give you a sense of what the state spent some of their funds on, you had the Oregon Worker Relief Fund, which are dollars that couldn't otherwise go toward that went toward folks that couldn't otherwise access benefits that the state was providing, like unemployment benefits. You had funding for the Oregon CARES Fund, providing economic relief to Black businesses and Black Oregonians, $500 emergency relief payments for folks impacted by job-related income loss, and then support for businesses and housing and public health and schools. So they've almost allocated all of these funds, and they need to be expended by the end of the year. But of note, they cannot be used for lost revenue, and so they're not able to address that big deficit that the state has. The other sort of curveball in all of this is that we just experienced and are experiencing across the state a major natural disaster with all of the wildfires. And so that's going to cost the state a lot of money to address. The governor issued vetoes on Sunday to preserve about $65 million in order to help go toward wildfire response, but there's going to need to be more. And so we'll continue to watch that as well. So when I package all of this together, the summary is we have significant state budget shortfalls. We have an increased need for state services and local services, right? When you're thinking about public health, wildfire response, unemployment, housing. So less revenue, more need. Additional federal assistance is going to be needed to really stabilize and recover out of this. And unfortunately, we're not going to see anything from the federal government before the end of this year. So that's my ray of sunshine. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. Next, we are going to hear from Mayor Wheeler. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Still on mute, Mayor.
That's ironic because what I said was, how did you beat, I was asking Jen how she beat you to the punch, and it's not. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for joining this evening. Thanks to my colleagues, thanks to all of our bureau directors and staff, and thanks especially to members of the public who are here with us this evening. The fall bump rarely gets as much attention as the annual budget gets in the spring. This year, I think, is going to be different. We're obviously navigating some difficult times. We're navigating a pandemic and its significant economic consequences. The climate emergency is still coming at us full bore. A transformational reckoning around racial justice, equity, and police reform is encouraging us to reimagine public safety and what we want for our community. And of course, we have very, very difficult decisions that we as a council have to make around how to both balance a difficult budget and provide for our community. This is about finding out which services the public wants, and we listen to the input that we get. That doesn't mean we're always going to agree. That doesn't mean we're going to do what people ask in every case, but it's really important in terms of helping shape our perceptions and our understanding of what the community is thinking. In June, we redirected $12 million from the Police Bureau budget. We invested in non-law enforcement first responder, and we restructured the Bureau to improve accountability. And then in July, we allocated $114 million in the Federal CARES Act funding for COVID-19 relief programs that prioritized renters and families and small businesses in our community. And I just want to point out that we put equity and the BIPOC community front and center in our recovery. 90% of the first $2 million that went out the door towards economic support went to businesses owned or operated by BIPOC people in our community, and we're appreciative of that. The values and priorities that guided our decisions this spring also guide us going forward. Anti-racism, as Dr. Markeisha Smith just discussed, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and of course, because it's a budget, fiscal responsibility always plays an important role. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you and what you think we should do. Thanks all for being here.
Great, thank you very much, Mayor Wheeler. Next, we're going to be hearing from Commissioner Fritz.
All right. I was not aware I was about to be called on. Thank you very much. Hang on a second. Let me pull up what I was going to say. It's very nice that you let the most senior member of the council go first. I appreciate that. As somebody who's been on the council, this is my 12th year and therefore my 12th budget monitoring process in the fall. I definitely agree that this process is for making minor adjustments to the budget in general. It's not when we do it's not when we do the more comprehensive changes, such as the ones that we made in the budget. This year, it will likely focus on continued response to COVID-19's economic impacts in both city operations and the community. The money that was already cut from the Police Bureau will be allocated with equity the primary consideration. And thank you, Dr. Markeisha Smith, for outlining the policy statements that the council has unanimously made and the process that we're going to be following. So next year, the financial year 2020 to 21 to 22 budget process starting in January is when further changes to Bureau's funding will be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Fritz, and I apologize for springing that on you all of a sudden. Commissioner Ryan is our next speaker. After that, we'll hear from Commissioner Hardesty and finally Commissioner Udaley, just so we all know the order.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, and thank you. I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself. I'm Commissioner Dan Ryan. This is my first town hall, and my job tonight, as I see it, is to be a really good listener. My head will be down now and then as I'm taking notes, and I really appreciated the framing that staff gave prior to this. And let me be brief, and so we can hear from the people that have signed up to talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ryan. Next, we have Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you so much. I want to start by just acknowledging the anxiety and tension that everyone in our community is experiencing. All of us are experiencing all the crises that were mentioned before, and yet we still get up every day and do the job that we have, that we have, if we're fortunate enough to have a job. And I want to thank the community members who made it here tonight to provide their voice. But I also want to challenge my colleagues. Yes, this is a normal time where we make little tinkers around the edges. But what I've been seeing on the street for the last 100 plus days is people want bold, brave leadership that actually points us in the right direction on what we're going to build coming out of this pandemic. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to wait till next year to start actually having an impact on what it is that people are telling us they want. And so I can't wait to hear what you have to ask tonight, what you have to put on the table tonight. And I hope you will continue to be involved, whether it's in the budget meetings or other community meetings that we will be having all across the city of Portland. We need to rethink Portland, and we need all Portlanders to be a part of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hardesty. Lastly, we'll be hearing from Commissioner Udaley.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. I'll just quickly share with you that we have no fall bump requests or adjustments to RAC. We have no significant adjustments to Civic Life, although we are temporarily suspending a couple programs that are very dear to me, so we'll hear about that later. And I think most significantly, we're not seeing any programmatic cuts or personnel or layoffs due to the swift action that we took early on with PBOT. Our forecast is slightly better than we thought it would be. Not much, but that's better than worse. And I'm just really proud of the Bureau and how creative and resourceful they're being. I want to highlight a couple requests that I would like to support. If we have discretionary funds to dole out, I joined the New Portlanders Policy Commission in advocating for more funding for the Oregon Workers Relief Fund. That's a fund that was set up to deliver relief to workers that fall through the cracks of our current system. And I also support a $2.5 million request from Reimagine Oregon. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we're ready to transition into our public testimony. And just to review our procedures, each person will have 2 minutes to comment. So you'll be timed by staff, in this case, Zachary Johnson. And then when your time's over, you'll be given a verbal warning, and then we'll be muted to allow for as much participation as possible. Okay, and then Zach will call out our first participants.
All right, so our first three speakers are going to be Jolene Joseph, Renee Perry, and Russell Brown in that order. So if we can start with Jolene Joseph.
Hi. Do I just start now? I just see a blank screen, so I will just start. So hi, my name is Jolene. Okay. Hi, my name is Jolene Joseph, and I am the Executive Director of the Native Wellness Institute. We're a Multnomah County-based national nonprofit. I like to say social profit. I'm also here representing the Portland Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Committee, and I'm here to give support to the increase in the budget to the tribal liaison position that Laura John currently holds. And the reason I'm supporting this and think it's valuable is for several reasons. One, it'll help to uplift the Native community and the multitude of needs that are out there. I actually Googled and looked up on February 8th, 1851 is when the city of Portland was founded. And in doing so, it not only erased our people from the landscape, but it erased our people from the halls of City Hall and erased our people from many other places. And that lasting impact, still trickles down and impacts our community today. And the tribal liaison position, I'm grateful for it. And I thank you for that. And it's a drop in the bucket. And Laura has taken those drops and she has turned it into a tsunami of amazing services that she has provided for our community, the amazing services she has provided for her colleagues within the city of Portland. And by giving her support staff and other staff to help elevate this work will help to meet the needs of our community. And so I'm here as a community member, as a leader in the community to help uplift her department within the city of Portland. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Renee Perry.
Good evening, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners Fritz, Hardesty, Udaley, and Ryan. I'm Renee Perry. I'm citizen of Tlingit Haida Nation, Inupiat and North European. and visitor to these indigenous homelands of the Columbia and Willamette River confluence and resident of Portland, Oregon. I'm here today as an Alaska Native resident, second vice co-chair of the Portland All Nations Canoe Family, and president of the local Alaska Native Sisterhood, a 108-year-old indigenous civil and human rights organization. I work on behalf of the Native community where it's appropriate on education and policy matters. This might seem to you a long introduction of myself, but this is not about me as one individual. My statement to you today is about the many nuances of one Native American and Alaska Native individual, a complex community of Native American Alaska Native peoples from over 380 tribes that live in the Portland area, having been sent, brought, or come to our own volition due to colonization, forced removal, educational pursuit, or the means of supporting our families. We are a blended community of diverse tribal nations. I would like to remind you of the 2012 proclamation the city made in regards to building relationships with tribes and the Native communities to uplift and support the sovereignty as international people through a government-to-government relationship. Establishing and sustainably supporting Larjon in the tribal relations position within the Office of Government Relations goes a long way in this relationship development between the City of Portland tribes and the Native community. She is uplifted by the community to work with you so that you can build your understanding and knowledge capacity, create opportunities to build trust from our communities, and establish policies that allow our communities to thrive in safety. Some important community relationship building has been the establishment of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women PDX Committee, already mentioned, the annual proclamation of May 6th to bring awareness to the plight of Native women and their families, the Portland Tribal Summit meeting with local tribes, the creation of an Indigenous Traditional Food Committee in response to COVID-19 to make sure our elders and Native families have healthy traditional foods, acting as liaison between the police and the Native community when recovering sacred objects that were stolen after our important ceremonies in the last year, and many other too numerous to mention at this time.
And that's your time. Thank you. Next up, we have Russell Brown.
All right, am I here?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I rehearsed this once. It was at 2 minutes, 30 seconds. I'm going to try to keep it short. It's going to be a little raw. Whether police officers, the feds, or protesters are the primary instigators of violence on any given night in Portland is an open question. What isn't an open question is that Portland has historically been, and arguably is still, plagued by the same institutionalized racism in its criminal justice system as every other major city in the United States. Oh, and some police excessive use of force on people already suffering from mental illness. On top of that, you will look at the DOJ agreement with the Obama administration from 2014 for that information. The movement for Black Lives has been marching for over 6 years now. We're talking since or before the death of Michael Brown. How long is it going to take for their message to sink in? Stop investing in this state-sanctioned monopoly on violence. You just banned the use of tear gas on protesters, Mr. Wheeler? Great. Okay, that's a starting point, not an ending point. In fact, it's barely progress when you consider the Portland Police Bureau's response. You're the police commissioner. Get your bureau under control. Here's some things to invest in besides crowd control munitions and guns to kill people, especially Black and mentally ill people without due process. Criminal justice reform in the counties that Portland shares stolen land with. Housing and mental health services for the homeless. This can also be part of cleaning up downtown. Conflict resolution for families, and better infrastructure in outer East Portland. That list goes on. By all means, keep brainstorming. But double or triple the investments you've already made in those areas. Please just make the police stop killing people, especially Black folks, and invest in something more worthwhile for all of us. Reform the police for real this time. If you can't, it's time to defund. I yield the floor.
Thank you. Our next three speakers are going to be Timur Ender, Caitlin Day, and Patricia Hill Welch in that order. We'll start with Timur.
Hi, my name is Timur Ender. Last month, the City Council in Austin, Texas voted unanimously to cut their police budget by 1/3 to fund food access and similar violence prevention efforts. Decisions like these ultimately make our communities safer because they address the root causes of crime, like poverty, hunger, unemployment, and income inequality. We need to look at violence from a public health lens. I reject the notion that taking funding from police budgets to invest in upstream public health approaches is anti-police, because the more shootings that are prevented through smart public policy and cost-efficient upstream public health interventions, the safer everyone is, including police. At a time when food box lines are almost half a mile long, we don't need more general fund money going to brand new police cars, batons, pepper spray, tasers, bullets, guns, rifles, impact munitions, chemical weapons to be used against our own taxpayers. I would also like to comment on general fund money being used to send local police to an ICE protest, which is what happened last Friday. The federal government has more than enough resources to handle a protest in Portland, Oregon. ICE asks for help from local police, not because they need it, but because they want to see if they can count on local police being an extension of DHS and ICE. Don't fall for it. Entangling local police with DHS is a key goal of the current administration. Don't ask us to vote for a parks levy while precious discretionary general fund dollars are being burned, sending local police to an ICE protest that city employees have no business being at. This country's founders did something virtually no other country has done, which is to ensure that local police are under the control of local governments. You have powers that most city councils and mayors outside the US do not. You need to be more aggressive and strategic about using that power. General fund resources should have nothing to do with DHS and ICE. We need to stand up to the current administration, not with words and tweets, but with budgets and policies that reflect this community's values. Finally, I want to thank Commissioner Hardesty for your leadership. It's not easy going against the Bull Connors of today. I've consistently been impressed with your votes on council and want to share my appreciation. I yield the floor.
Thank you. Next, we have Caitlin Day.
Hi there. My name is Caitlin. I organize with Care Not Cops and Western Regional Advocacy Project, or WRAP. I've spent the past few weeks doing some research in preparation for the fall bump, and there's a few things that have stood out to me. For one, I understand the emphasis on specialty units as a strategy to make cuts to the police bureau. I do worry, however, the funding of these specialty units will simply result in the Portland Police Bureau eventually restructuring in a way to serve the same functions as the defunded specialty units, but with a different name. I think we are already seeing that with the controversy around the gun violence reduction team. Keep GVRT defunded and do not restructure PPB in an attempt to bring back what is essentially the GVRT by a different name. I use GVRT as an example, but I believe this point extends to all specialty units we defunded. Next, I really believe now is a good opportunity to review contracts the Portland Police Bureau has with various entities in Portland. I recognize the fall bump is mostly focused on general fund allocations, but PPB uses a variety of means to secure funding, most notably for me, through their contract with the Portland Business Alliance for the Clean and Safe Enhanced Services District. As city commissioners should know, a recent audit spurred by research from WRAP further exposed how ESDs operate with almost non-existent oversight, despite the harmful nature of their security contracts and contracts with the police and district attorney. The Portland Business Alliance and the Portland Police Bureau contract can be terminated at any time with 30-day notice from either party. Mayor Wheeler, as police commissioner, from my understanding, you could revoke this contract today if you really wanted to. I highly suggest you consider doing so, as this contract is extremely harmful to houseless communities. This should be of utmost concern if homelessness is your self-proclaimed #1 issue. To close, I just want to say us at WRAP, we would love to talk more with each of you about ESDs in the recent audit, especially considering the Clean Safe contract is up for renewal in 2021. Commissioner Hardesty, we appreciate your recognition of our work that brought us this far. We also believe the work has only just begun and would love to touch base with your office again. This also extends to Commissioners Udaley, Fritz, and Ryan. And of course, Wheeler, as the commissioner in charge of overseeing ESDs, we would appreciate hearing more from you.
Thank you. Next, we have Patricia Hill Welch. Patricia?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Patricia Welch, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Centers Community Advisory Committee. Due to time constraints, I'm reading highlights of the letter in support of the IFCC feasibility study fall BMP request. The full letter was sent to the mayor and all commissioners yesterday and is provided for inclusion in the record. The IFCC CAC was convened in July of 2018 with the charge of developing a visioning and community engagement process to determine a path forward for IFCC. On August 31st of that year, 3 of our members met with Mayor Wheeler. He asked us to come back with a vision and to think big. We took his words to heart. Over the course of the next several months, we determined that reactivating the IFCC in the existing facility would not be financially sustainable. An expansion of the physical capacity and thus revenue generated capabilities of the facility was needed to make any reactivation proposal both responsive to community needs and operationally viable. On March 8th, 2019, we issued a progress report containing a vision for IFCC's future, which posed questions that needed to be answered by the city to move this vision forward. One of the key questions the committee asked is whether the city is willing to support pursuit of the CAC's vision by providing dollars to conduct a feasibility study to investigate various expansion scenarios and business plans to determine the ideal scale and mix of operations that would be necessary to support any revitalized IFCC facility and plan. As of August 2020, preliminary zoning analysis and scoping for a detailed feasibility study had already been completed by FFA architects under a contract with the Portland Parks and Recreation Bureau. We now seek your support for the current Office of Management and Finance's $250,000 PMP funding request for resources to conduct a comprehensive redevelopment feasibility study to advance the CAC's vision for IFCC as a home for African American arts and culture in Northeast Portland. In 1982, Charles Jordan, Portland's first African American commissioner.
Sorry, that's time.
All right, thank you very much on behalf of the committee.
Thank you. All right, our next 3 comments are going to come from Kai McCurdy, Hyung Nam, and Alan Kessler. Kai?
Yep, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My name's Kai. I live in Northeast Portland. Earlier this year, as part of this council's responsibility to pass a city budget, tens of thousands of Portland residents called, emailed, marched, and demonstrated to demand a new vision of public safety in the city. We all know those demonstrations and the feelings that inspire them continue today. In response to those calls, $15 million was reallocated. And while I want to be sure to thank Commissioner Hardesty for her tireless work that started long ago, $15 million out of nearly $250 million is far from enough. Since that budget was approved, PPB has spent tens of thousands of dollars on munitions to shoot at Portland residents. They've racked up more than $5 million in overtime wages and have made it clear that they don't believe in accountability, not just to the people, but also to the mayor. Additionally, PPA has engaged in a public relations campaign to claim that recent crime is the direct result of a budget reduction of less than a few %. This claim is unsupported and disingenuous and further proves that public safety is not the principal goal of the organization. I'm speaking today to urge this council not to backslide on the previous cuts and to work together to find every opportunity available to defund PPB and reinvest that money into community safety and care that will allow Portland to thrive in an equitable way. I hope it's clear from the last 100+ days that the community does not feel enough has been done. Black Lives Matter. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next, we have Hyung Nam. Hyung?
Hi, my name is Hyung Nam. I served on the Portland Police Bureau's Budget Advisory Committee, and also I teach political economy at Wilson High School. I'm a coordinating committee member of Portland Metro People's Coalition. And I'm here to say that we need to be prepared for major social needs and adjust our budget by cutting from the police to reinvest in communities that are most impacted by this historic recession, pandemic, and oppressive policing, especially for housing and healthcare. I also want to counter the misleading narratives coming from the Portland Police Bureau about the gun violence reduction team. They're claiming that cuts to that team has led to increase in violent gun crimes. That's happening all over the country. It's not happening because we cut GVRT. And their narratives are just really misleading. Same thing with retirements. There was a block exodus of retirements because they get a bonus with an extra pay period, not because of protests or anything like that. We know the public does not trust the police. We know from their own study from the Strategic Insights report from March 2019. Over 70% of Portlanders and among Black people, 85% don't trust them. And the big issue is because of accountability. We need to rethink public safety. The police mostly do not deal with violent crime and keeping us safe. Most of what police do have nothing to do with major violent crimes. We know from a New York Times report that about 1% of all calls for service for police departments is to deal with violent crimes. We have large social needs that we need to deal with, not with the police. I want to specifically call for cutting the rest of the CERT team, our SWAT team, which was sued by even one of our female sergeants for discrimination, and cut the rapid response team, the riot squad that has been brutalizing people, that is really a threat to public safety, public health, and our environment. We know that Lieutenant Jeff Nia on RTT favored the Proud Boys, protected Proud Boys assaulters from arrest. We need to cut those units, and we need to cut the criminal intelligence unit. It's time to rethink public safety, and we need to eliminate positions, not refill those vacancies, which are really costly. And we need to stop the police abuse of overtime. They are cashing out on all this overtime that we're going to have to pay for decades in their higher retirement costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have.
Thank you for the testimony. I'm sorry, there's one thing I do need to chime in here because I just feel a moral obligation to do so. There were questions about Lieutenant Nia's actions. That was thoroughly investigated, and the investigation concluded that it was not the case that he was showing bias. So I just have to put that on the record.
Okay, next we have Alan Kessler. Alan.
Hi. Fascinating. The police investigated themselves and found they didn't do anything wrong. Where have I heard that before? My name's Alan Kessler. I am frustrated that the slides that we were shown earlier today don't break out public safety, fire, 911 from the folks who are brutalizing us. It lumps them all together. I don't think anybody in the city feels that that's a big public safety block. I think we need to be transparent about where all this money is going. I've been working really hard to get data and information, and I am constantly frustrated by the Public Records Office, which is, as far as I'm concerned, part of the police force, designed to hide information, to keep it from the public, to keep that blue wall of silence intact. We are about to face tons of lawsuits. I'm going to bring some of them. The city is going to be bankrupted by all of the violence that the police are doing to us. It's on film. That's extremely well documented. That's absolutely outrageous. We are being poisoned by our police and by our mayor. Chemical weapons, expired munitions, chemicals banned in war, chemicals known to cause cancer. We're spreading them all over our city, letting them wash into our water. We're going to be sued for decades about all of this environmental damage. If our union survives and we still have courts, we are paying people to sit around and wait for protesters to show up so they can brutalize us, slash our tires, do property damage, commit crimes with impunity. All of these costs were not in that huge red wedge of the budget that we're giving to so-called public safety. The mayor has a disingenuous plan to, well, he put on our ballot a parks measure, which will free up a whole bunch of parks money from that general fund, which is the 10% we argue about, so that can go to pay off all of these debts we're incurring in terms of environmental damage and tort claims and overtime and pensions. This is outrageous. You are squandering our future. You are paying all of our coffers out to the suburbs for police retirement. You are wasting countless dollars on tort claims that we're going to be fighting forever. And instead of opening things up and fixing this, you're hiring more attorneys to fight us. Eliminate the police force. It's just an expense we can't afford. Spend it on social services. This is monstrous. Thank you.
Okay, our next three speakers in order are going to be Silas Covert-Keefe, Robert Guthrie, and Renee Ramey. We'll start with Silas Covert-Keefe.
Hi, my name is Silas Covert-Keefe. I work for Home Forward as a resident services coordinator. I work with people living in public housing, and I every day talk to people who do not have enough food for themselves or their children, people who frequently have their lights off or do not have power in their units because they can't afford their power bills, people right now who can't afford Wi-Fi, and so their children who are trying to do virtual learning, they're having to figure out a lot of really difficult ways to get internet access. And it's difficult to know that these people who are trying very hard just to survive could really be thriving if we weren't spending so much money on police. And I have witnessed the police in these protests fire tear gas at people. I have witnessed them fire flashbangs at people. I saw the videos of what they did by Ventura Park, firing military-grade weapons at peaceful people in a dense residential neighborhood. These police are not listening to the directives of the mayor, who is supposedly in charge of them. This should be very concerning that the most violent and heavily armed group that we as taxpayers fund seem to not be in control of us, the people who are citizens paying for them, but also our elected officials. They are not listening to anybody. I've also seen them side with white supremacists at these different protests where they seem to only guard one side of the protest. It is very clear that the police are not serving the greater good of the people or the needs of the people, and that money can be better spent if we spent it on social services, which a number of people are saying, which a lot of data backs up. These aren't new things. These aren't new ideas. We know that if we give more money to police, they're just going to beat up more people. They're just going to terrorize more people of color, and they're not going to solve problems. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Robert Guthrie.
Hi, my name is Rob Guthrie. I live in Southeast Portland, and I'm here to talk about, you guessed it, defunding the police. Others have and will make stronger arguments regarding the specific injustices visited upon the people of Portland by the PBB, and I will leave that to them. I want to talk instead about some elements of the proposed budget and the function of the police bureau itself. In the past 10 years, crime has remained largely the same in Portland and even in some cases increased. Specifically of note are property crimes, which if you review the city's own data and compare it to this year and the projections for the next is kind of telling. In 2011, property crimes per 1,000 residents was 52. In the fiscal year of 2018-2019, it was 72. Also, the police, by the metrics in the city's own budget document, clear around 10% of property crimes and 35% of crimes against persons. The point I'd like to make briefly is that if I were this bad at my job, I would almost certainly not receive additional funding. I might not even keep my position. If you're concerned about the protection of private property, which is something that this mayor and this council constantly claim to be, I would start to wonder whether or not this is a useful and effective use of resources. I want to draw into question the massive increase in funding the PBB has received over the last decade and suggest a substantial drawing down of the scope and funding of the police, as well as a substantial and thorough financial audit of the Bureau and their use of the generous discretionary funding that they are afforded. Thank you very much. And Ted, please resign.
Thank you. Next, we have Renee Ramey. Renee?
Hi, my name is Renee Ramey. I am 51 years old. I moved into Portland on July 27th, having become suddenly estranged from my family due to problems, basically due to COVID, that we couldn't stay in the same house together when felt like the world was falling apart. There was George Floyd's death. There were a number of issues. I see the economic crisis coming. I can feel the homelessness. I can feel the anxiety in the lower ends of the economic ladder. I know the people who just bought houses are wondering how they're going to make ends meet if they lose their job this winter or have to quarantine for a month while people are recovering from an illness they don't understand. In the meantime, I've been hanging out around Chapman Square because when I was at my lowest, those were the people who understood me. They protected me when I was attacked by local thugs. I was kicked in the face twice, needed 11 stitches. I called 911. I had been on the phone with 911 for over 5 minutes when I was attacked. I left the phone ringing on 911 to run away. And then I went to the Radisson where my hotel was with the help of the homeless friends. And the police never answered the phone for the Radisson. So the Radisson has a report of this attack, but the police don't. They never answered the phone. This is under Mayor Ted Wheeler's watch. This is unacceptable. And meanwhile, we have like artists, people who want to just make art are now locked up because they're mentally ill. They really are suffering from a problem. And we have rapists walking free, distributing drugs and ensnaring young women into sex trafficking. The women are trapped. I know at least 2 that wanted to get off the street. At least 1 was desperate to get off the street. And I drove around until 1 in the morning in the middle of the smoke with no place to take her, no place that was open, nothing that would work because she had drugs in her system. We're failing. This is a Black woman. We are failing our Black women and girls. We're failing our LGBTQ community. We can do better if we had the resources to buy a building and maintain it ourselves. I'd like to talk about this more offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next 3 speakers are going to be Jana Tessman, Ethan Harrison, and Vanessa Mariskal. We'll start with Jana.
I am also very concerned about Clean and Safe and similar agencies and their spending on officers, and even more so of their spending on clerks in the DA's office. I am fine with them paying for additional trash cleanup services, but any spending should be required to be at least matched with revenue for housing and services for the houseless. I want to remind everyone here that the tear gas ban is temporary and of only one type of tear gas. It needs to be permanent, especially considering the upcoming elections that the police are already gearing up for. It is expensive and, more importantly, unethical. I see repeated calls for the small core of supposedly the most extreme protesters and activists to stand down or be properly stopped with more severe government violence. I'm going to need an example. The police need to go first and remove the most violent of these spoiled apples who have been identified by activists on social media more quickly and readily than the dozens of supposed oversight, review, and advisory boards seemingly created as so much distractionary pressure release valves to frustrate the public and again protect the police from consequences. I am tired of paying for the lawsuits to cover for their misdeeds. The city is about to face a massively expensive tsunami from these lawsuits due to the police's rioting, protection racketeering, and extortion of the people they are abusing and neglecting by pettily refusing to attend priority calls. No more new money for new police officers. According to their very own propaganda video, the police cannot fully train new officers until the Oregon State Police Academy reopens. Adding to the waiting list will not open the academy any sooner. Consistently wearing masks would, but the police have refused to do so, risking the public they are supposedly sworn to protect and risking their own lives, considering that the #1 cause of death this year has been a police due to COVID. Another cause of death of police this year have been shooters with ties to white power hate groups, similar to the ones the police repeatedly choose to escort through town. Just because they will cooperate with you enough to tell you which streets they plan to block ahead of time does not mean that they would not turn around and kill police officers. It is for police officers' own safety.
Time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Ethan Harrison. Ethan?
Hi, this is Ethan. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My name is Ethan Harrison. I am a working class queer person who uses they, them pronouns. I live in zip code 97211. At least and until my housemates and I are forcibly evicted by Multnomah County for being too poor, and because the city of Portland, instead of materially extending an eviction moratorium, has made the performative gesture to expand RELO, a measure that Ted Wheeler actually hates and is doing so for his own election benefit. I also must in this moment acknowledge that we live on stolen indigenous land that must be given back to its original inhabitants. Furthermore, I want to acknowledge that earlier in this testimony, I believe the second person was an indigenous woman who had her mic cut off, and not a single commissioner chose to stand up and give her more time. That's absolutely abhorrent. To this budget process, I want to note that Josh's presentation laid out pretty clearly that wealthy people are not having their wallets hit hard. This paints an amazing support for a millionaire's tax on households with income above $1 million. To the budget itself, we have a sacred cow of more than $200 million in the form of the Portland Police Bureau. Commissioners, you had a mandate in the form of popular support, community groups like Unite Oregon, and a city council hearing with scores of people telling you what they wanted. A clear and concise vision to cut $50 million, to divert those millions into care, not police. But instead, what did you do? You failed to act. And Chloe Udela, you hid behind your tears. Tevis Wheeler, you hid behind procedure. Commissioner Fritz, we didn't even hear from you. You sat back and didn't say anything. I look forward to not having to hear you on city council as you retire at the end of this year. So I guess constituents, we're getting a picture here that we're going to have to keep providing our public comment in the streets. And also to the constituents listening, I want to note that Ted Wheeler felt the need to speak up and interject about Jeff Naya to lick that boot harder. I want to remember, Ted Wheeler, you sat there in that church with us and listened to community when we had a public hearing with you and Daniel Outlaw. So as my time's coming to an end, fuck Ted Wheeler, fuck the police, Black Lives Matter.
Thank you for your eloquent statement. The reason I mentioned Lieutenant Nia is because whether you like him or not, he's a city employee, and we have procedures for investigating and holding city employees accountable. And somebody came in and made a false statement about one of our city employees, and I felt it was important to correct the record.
Next, we have Vanessa Mariscal.
Hi, I'm a person of color. Ted Wheeler, please stop letting yourself be bullied. Please stand up for the city, because we do not want to elect that other person that's running against you. The police are doing overtime because of all of the riots and the protests. It's freaking ridiculous. Also, before you defund the police, you need to have the vote of all of your citizens, not just the 100 to 200 whiny white kids that are out there because they have never suffered consequences themselves. I'm a person of color, and geez Louise, we need police. There's crime on your streets. There's crime against your citizens. The rioters and the protesting are provoking the police, and they're filming the narrative. Crime is up. Look at your numbers. Cities have been defunded. Do you want us to look like Baltimore, Detroit, or Chicago? People drive down the street in my neighborhood so fast because there's no consequences, because you guys have been told, we're telling all of us that you have defunded the police. You're listening to 1% of your citizens to tell you they want to defund the police. There's 1 million citizens in Portland. You need to listen to all of us. We're not out there protesting and rioting because we're working. We're active members of society. We pay our taxes. Please listen to us. Stop listening to the young white kids that are out there that don't know consequences and they don't want any goddamn police. Why are your citizens suffering because of the hundreds and 200s of people rioting and protesting every night? We want police. Please focus on homelessness, which is slapping us in the face, drug addiction, which is slapping us in the face, and graffiti that's everywhere. And if you don't want to be tear gassed, get off the goddamn street. Wheeler, pick your head up. Protect us. Thank you.
All right, and the last two community members we will hear from tonight are Audrey Heish and Jenna Woolley. Audrey?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Good evening, Mayor Wheeler and valued members of the City Council. My name is Audrey Heish. I 100% support and am behind the Black Lives Matter initiative. While, as so uneloquently the person before me, I am a white person. But I knew that there were injustices within our society. But this movement has allowed me to take off my rose-colored glasses and truly listen and hear the people's real-life stories that they're going through every single day. Stories that go beyond my initial understanding. I cannot comprehend how people can hear these stories and feel as though systemic racism isn't rampant throughout our society. That buildings and property are more important than human beings and their quality of life. It has truly opened my eyes to deep-seated racism that people are not willing to acknowledge within themselves. That being said, I do acknowledge that we cannot entirely defund the only system in place that sustains public safety. I would love to see that all deferred money from Portland Police go towards building social programs with a tangible plan to continually reroute the public funding from Portland Police to these social programs. This would allow the Bureau to quote unquote reorganize and have a substantive partner that handles calls that can be that should not be handled with firearms and force. Furthermore, I would love to see that these fundings that were initially earmarked for body cameras for police officers be implemented, because accountability should be of the highest priority. I recognize the path will not be easy, especially with the dramatic reduction in revenue available during COVID. However, I believe in our system to do the right thing for the citizens who are pleading for this change. Meaningful change needs to take place, and this is where it starts. We are currently in a climate of pointing fingers, so I do want to acknowledge the steps that Mayor Wheeler has taken so far, including no longer taking a salary. Thank you for your time, and I yield the floor.
Thank you. And finally, we have Gina Woolley.
This is Gina Woolley. I actually was listening in. I am a member of the IFCC CAC. Patricia has already delivered testimony on our behalf, and so I really don't have anything further to say regarding to the mayor and the commissioners this evening.
Okay, thank you. That was our last comment, so I will turn it back over to Jen.
Okay, thank you everyone for comment. I want to open up the floor to our elected officials and see if there are any comments or remarks that you'd like to make before we do some wrap up.
Commissioner Hardesty has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor. I was waiting to see if you were going to unmute.
Probably not.
I want to thank everyone who took the time and made the time to be here this evening. It's really important that we hear directly from community members, and I know that the time was short for you to actually be able to participate in this first budget meeting. But there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that people know. I appreciated Vanessa testifying. And I just want Vanessa to know I'm from Baltimore, and I think Baltimore is a beautiful city, and I think Portland is also a beautiful city. I want to remind people that before we made the budget reductions that totaled $28 million in the Portland Police Bureau's budget, we in this office received over 75,000 emails, and we stopped counting at 75,000, but we got more. we had over 700 community members show up to testify in support of a number to be cut from Portland Police Bureau. I am proud that my colleagues and I were very thoughtful about the cuts that were made, and those cuts were made very specifically to programs that either had no accountability built in, like the body cam program. Had we implemented the body cam program, the law says that the police bureau would own the data and the police bureau would decide when that data became public. There was no way I was going to invest a penny into a pretend police oversight system. I am proud that my colleagues and I got rid of that. I also want to say that people have all kind of different perceptions about the role that police play in our community. And I hope you will join me and Mayor Wheeler as we have community dialogue around what community safety looks like. We need to rethink Portland, and we will not build the Portland that existed prior to the pandemic. That Portland will never exist again. But you can partner with us in rethinking what Portland will be as we start rebuilding. And I hope you are ready for that, because this is the easy part. The hard part's going to be rebuilding a community that is just, fair, and equitable for all Portlanders. And I'm up for the task. I hope you are. Thank you again for being here.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to everybody who testified. It's good to hear different opinions, and that's why we do have the major budget process that will start in January so that all of those can be aired. It is important to note that the emails that we're receiving are not unanimous in any way at all. So there's a lot of different opinions, and it's important to have a proper outreach time and a proper process so that everybody in our community can be heard, as Vanessa alluded to. I also noted that the Indigenous people were cut off, and some of the people who were testifying against the police were not. And I also noticed that the Interstate Firehouse committee members were very respectful in stopping when they were asked to do. So when Mayor Wheeler is managing the meeting, he will often invite people to continue speaking to finish their thoughts. And then furthermore, city commissioners can ask questions of participants. We weren't sure how many people were going to be speaking today. And, you know, we're all working together in this new process on this platform that is still, obviously, as we have difficulty with muting and unmuting even, it's challenging. So let's be kind to each other. Let's listen to each other. Let's find out what other people's perspective is. That's how we're going to make decisions together. And in particular, thinking back to what Dr. Markeisha Smith said, we need to get back to centering the Black Lives Matter movement, the justice for Indigenous peoples, which was alluded to with the support for expanding the Tribal Relations Program. There are multiple investments in the Office of Equity and Human Rights that we're proposing to use some of the cuts from police funding for. So as I say, let's try to work together. That's what Portlanders do. We certainly vigorously disagree with each other. Sometimes we do vigorously disagree on the council, and yet we need to focus on getting our community through the multiple crises that we are currently in. And I just appreciate everybody who's willing to engage to do that, and particularly my colleagues on the council and Mayor Wheeler for his leadership.
Commissioner Udaley, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm going to keep this brief. Commissioner Hardesty really already touched on what I wanted to highlight, which I just don't want the massive public outreach that happened during our budget process earlier this year to be downplayed. We heard from over 10% of our community members That is record breaking. That is unlikely to have ever happened in the history of Portland City Council. Certainly hasn't happened since I took office. So not to mention thousands of people coming out for weeks on end to protest and support the Black Lives Matter movement. There is definitely huge support in the community. I understand many of the concerns expressed tonight. I just didn't want to let that particular comment go by. Thanks.
Commissioner Ryan, did you want to say anything before I jump in?
Yes, sure. Well, this was a wonderful first experience for our community meeting, and I appreciated everything my colleagues have already said. I want to say that underscore what Commissioner Hardesty said, how difficult it is to build. And I hope as a city, when we do this, we take every issue seriously, but sometimes we don't take ourselves so seriously because it's going to be really messy. And if we want to be the city that is the most progressive and innovative, we have to also have the flexibility and nimbleness and kindness to allow ourselves to get through some really rough patches. So I think it's really clear we can't go back. I think that's true on so many levels. And when we talk about building a better community safety system, there's a lot of other systems in the city that we get to rebuild as well. So I'm excited to be on this body at this time. I like to build, and I look forward to doing it with my colleagues, but most importantly, doing it with the community. And we need you. And so I think we've done, I personally, I think the name calling needs to subside as we move forward at a really dark time nationally. And I hope Portland doesn't split hairs so much with our progressive pureness, but that we can come together with our creativity at this time. So I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for everyone who showed up tonight and provided a voice.
Well, and I'll just jump in and remind people that this is a great opportunity for us to hear and reflect on the interests of our community. I really appreciate people who hung with us tonight. Even the guys who are kind of jerks who come in and name call and swear and all that kind of thing, their perspective is an interesting one, and I'm not afraid to hear it. I liked Vanessa's comments because I think she speaks for a lot of people who I hear from, and their voices are not always heard, and they need to be heard, because the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people who demand basic city services. And if you read the front of the Oregonian last week, it highlighted a family, coincidentally of color, who waited an hour and a half for a police response. And sort of the glib reaction to that was, well, if the police weren't busy with the demonstrations, they would be able to respond. Well, the fact of the matter is our response time was slow before George Floyd was murdered. And we still have real shortcomings in our ability to respond either to gun violence. Commissioner Daley has raised on several counts the importance of the enforcement mechanism around Vision Zero, and are we adequately staffing and supporting that? There's been lots of calls for training and new ways of thinking in the police bureau. And I don't want to delude anybody into thinking that's going to come for free. It's not. There are parts of improving the public safety system that could well cost us more. And I'm excited about some of the alternative programs that we're looking at, the Portland Street Response and some of the other solutions that we've already put into place. And Dan, I really like what you just said. I think at some point we've got to get over ourselves and stop taking ourselves so seriously and acknowledge we're facing all these crises, COVID, the economic crisis, which is killing our small local businesses. We have the nightly demonstrations. We just got over the forest fires, the livability issues around graffiti and around litter. And by the way, Vanessa, if you're still hanging with us, we have a major initiative that we're about to announce on those things. And the homeless crisis, which was already catastrophic before COVID, is only going to get worse without significant investments. And I've directed Jessica and Tom Reinhardt and the Housing Bureau Director and the Prosper Director to give me a plan to open 300 more shelter beds so we can get people off the sidewalks and into a more humane place. So there's lots of opportunities here. I want to end on a positive note, though, because it's late and I'm hungry and I don't like ending on a negative note. I'm going to put a contrarian point of view out there, which is we will look back on this not as the worst of times, but as the best of times. What do I mean by that? I actually believe we will get over the COVID crisis. We will demonstrate an ability to get through that. And there are people all around the world looking for a vaccine and solutions to that. I believe we will have that vaccine. I don't know when. It probably won't be on November 1st, but we will have a vaccine. The economy will recover. And we're seeing cities like Portland and states all around the country focusing on small business resilience and education and job training and ways to keep people's heads above water. And then when it comes to issues around housing, the city's doing a great job. I think we can make inroads into the homeless crisis, and the forest fires will go out. And that will actually lead, I think, to a rethinking of how we manage our forests and what practices we use to mitigate fires, to protect our communities and also protect our environment. So we could actually look back on this and remember, yeah, it was a time of challenge, but it's also a time of transformation. And you and I, my colleagues, we're lucky enough to be here in these positions at this particular time in history to be able to help shape it. And yeah, it hurts. I don't like all the names I get called. And I agree with Vanessa, who said, don't let people bully me. I agree. There's some lines that have to be drawn, and I'm going to draw them. But I just want to say I appreciate working with you, my colleagues. I appreciate everybody who came out tonight. Thank you for our staff. Jen, I thought you did a great job of moderating today and keeping us all on track, and to our bureau directors and staff who showed up. Thanks to you too. So everybody go eat dinner. Have a great night. We'll see you all in the morning.
Well, let me just jump in really quick, Mayor Wheeler. I really appreciate your concluding remarks, but before we leave, I just want to give one more shout out to our next steps and other opportunities for folks to give comments. So I'm excited to go eat dinner too, but let me just do a few next opportunities. So we mentioned you can always submit online comments at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. You can also always email comments to citybudgetoffices@portlandoregon.gov. All of the comments will be provided to council offices. In addition to the online comments, we will also have an additional listening session for the fall bump on October 6th. It'll have a very similar format to this session. In addition, there will be a council work session on the fall budget monitoring process on October 20th. Public comments will not be heard at the work session, but that's a place where people can get some more information. The fall budget monitoring process ordinance will be heard on the 28th. And then in addition, the Portland Committee for Community Engaged Policing will be hosting a session on the police budget specifically. City Council will attend, and then that session will be Tuesday, September 29th from 6 to 8. And then finally, there'll be more community listening events in the coming months as part of the development of the fiscal year 2021-2022 for the annual budget. So there will be more opportunity for comments, and we definitely welcome that. But thank you all for coming and providing your comments, and we really appreciate your attention to this important process.
Thank you.
Good night.
So, Jen, thanks also to Open Signal and to our interpreters. Thank you for your hard work on this. All right. We are adjourned. Good night, everybody.